Exactly how important is the price of fuel when it comes to buying your next new car? Let's separate fact from fiction on that. I'm John Cadogan from autoexpert.com.au, the place where Aussie new car buyers save thousands off their next new cars. Hit me up on the website for that. And now let's talk about one of the most common questions I get asked all the time. Unplugged, unscripted, and almost off the cuff. I have actually done some research on this. The most recent question comes from a guy named Rod, who I had a bit of an exchange with by email, pleasantly enough. Rod says, I noticed you didn't rate the 2.4 petrol version of the Santa Fe. On that basis, I have largely ruled it out. But at the same time, I don't do a lot of highway kilometres and I'm worried about a diesel for that reason. And I think that's fair enough. You know, if you're not able to get out on the highway once a fortnight, it's probably a bad idea to buy a diesel because of the long-term health effects that your kind of urbanised driving will have on the diesel particle filter. And the particle filters are a good idea because they stop those carcinogenic particles from getting sprayed out into the air for everyone around you to breathe. So you need to get out on the highway to allow the filter to regenerate. But the main aspect here is the 2.4 engine and the 3.6. And I got back to Rod several times by email and he followed up by saying, I will seek out a drive in the 2.4. I'm not that keen on the V6 being thirstier still and front wheel drive only with that larger engine. So I want to talk to you about this, the determination about fuel consumption and how that plays when you're buying a brand new car. Because many people, in Australia in particular, are obsessed about the price of fuel and they blow it out of absolutely all proportion. So here's the basic landscape, all right? The Hyundai Santa Fe is available with two petrol engines, the base model Active with the 2.4 four-cylinder, and you can take one step up to an Active X, which comes with a 3.3 litre V6. The 2.4 is an adequate engine in the same way that the 2 litre 4 is an adequate engine in the base model Tucson. It's not outstanding, you're not going to set the world on fire anytime soon with either of those engines in either of those vehicles, but it will do the job. The 3.6 is obviously a bit more potent, and one of the differences there is the 2.4 is packaged with all-wheel drive, the 3.3 is front drive only. So with those chess pieces in place on the board, let's talk about fuel consumption, because the difference in fuel consumption is 1.1 litres per 100 kilometres. That's based on the official laboratory tests. Okay, so how much difference does that actually make to the bottom line? I calculated that out. I had a look at Ausstats and what they say about the average distance that we all drive in Australia per vehicle. It's about 15,000 Ks. It's 14 and a bit. Let's call it 15 for the sake of argument. So when you calculate the differential cost of operation there, we're talking about 60 cents a day, okay? About $4.20 a week between the V6 and the 2.4. And I'd suggest that 60 cents a day is such a trivial amount in the context of the cost of motoring, particularly if you are buying a new car, that it is inconsequential. I mean, why does it even factor in the decision? I'd suggest that in a rational analysis, it does not. Because if you have enough cash to buy a brand new car, 60 cents a day is nothing in terms of the other costs of owning that brand new car. So let's just look at those costs for a moment. The Hyundai 2.4 Santa Fe is going to cost you about 40 grand, let's say, ballpark. The repayments, if you borrow the full 40 grand and you have a 30% balloon at the end of 5 years and the interest rate is 6%, the repayments are going to be about $716 a month. Now, I did the calculations on that. That's $24 a day. That's orders of magnitude more than 60 cents a day, right? The other big cost that many people don't factor into the new car ownership scenario is depreciation. After that 5 years of ownership, paying the $716 every month for the finance, the depreciation, which is a hidden cost, it's going to cost you about 20 grand over 5 years. That's $4,000 a year, yeah? And the $4,000 a year is 80 bucks a week, obviously. That's $11.50 a day. That's nearly 20 times the differential cost of the fuel every day that you own that car for 5 years. So when you add them both up, we're talking about 179 bucks a week for the finance and about 80 bucks a week for the depreciation, totaling 260 bucks every week to park that $40,000 Santa Fe in your driveway, which is broadly representative of the cost of every other $40,000 car you might buy here in Australia. So you're going to basically fork out this 260 bucks every week, and yet you're making the difference in fuel consumption for $4.20 a week a factor in your decision. I don't think that's crazy. I just think it's irrational, and I think the main problem here is not putting all the costs in perspective, because if the $4.20 differential cost of the V6 versus the 2.4 is significant to you, then you don't have the money to own that $40,000 car. You just don't. All right, so, and if you do have the money to own the car, then the cost of the fuel is insignificant, and you should look at other factors that might play into your decision. And I did that too, and I can't keep all that in my head, so you'll have to just bear with me a bit while I refer to my notes on that, because unplugged doesn't mean unprepared. For 60 cents a day, what do you get if you buy the V6? Well, for starters, you get 44% more peak power, and you get 32% more peak torque. And the downside of this powertrain is obviously if you're a harsh mongrel on the gas when the lights go green, you will chirp the wheels from time to time, and the traction control might kick in, and that might cause your forward progress to stutter. And although that's undignified, the easy fix there is to just squeeze the throttle gently. And don't apply a big throttle input off the mark until you get to 10 or 15 kilometres per hour, at which point it's much, much harder to spin the wheels, and you can kind of go nuts if that's what you'd like to do. So there's the feedback effect of the front drive only powertrain. But what are the advantages of that? Because when you look at 2.4 versus 3.3 and you look at it simplistically like four-cylinder versus V6, the bigger engine is going to be thirstier and I don't want that, then that is a completely flawed way to look at the whole value proposition, because all of those components that comprise the all-wheel drivetrain that is packaged with the 2.4, they're not free. They cost you a shitload, and you might not think about it very much, but you're paying for them. So when you get the V6 in the ActiveX specification level, because it does not have the all-wheel drive powertrain behind you, they can put a ton of additional equipment in that car. So try this on for size. Here's what you get if you buy the V6, which is $1,000 cheaper than the base model 2.4. Okay, it's a higher specification grade in terms of the equipment level, if not the powertrain. It's a higher specification grade, but it costs $1,000 less, and you also get this, okay? You get 19-inch wheels as opposed to the 17s that come with the active spec with the 2.4. You get leather seats as opposed to cloth with the 2.4. You get climate control air conditioning instead of the standard twist the dial to make the temperature right air conditioning in the 2.4. You get a chilled glove box because, I don't know, nobody wants warm gloves. You get wheel-mounted phone controls, which are a tremendous advantage if you are a frequent caller, a frequent taker of calls in particular on your mobile phone when you're driving. You get seat heaters, pretty nice in winter, not much good if you live in Darwin, I suppose. Rain-sensing wipers come with the 3.3 V6. You get privacy glass, and you also get the tyre pressure monitoring system. And this is not some sort of mad discount. This is the equipment that they can afford to jam in that car because you're not paying for a transfer case in the centre, a prop shaft going to the rear, a diff at the rear, and, drive shafts out to those two rear tyres. And all of that heavy engineering stuff, that costs money in each car. And this is the benefit that you can reap if you don't need that. And if you don't want to go camping ever, you don't want to drive on a road that Mum's Corolla or Camry can't take you, then I'd suggest the 3.3 V6 is actually a compelling consumer proposition instead of the 2.4 four-cylinder in the active. It's really all about how you look at the car overall. And the other thing I'd say about fuel consumption is if you're really that obsessed about fuel consumption, people spend a lot of time looking up the specs on fuel consumption, but they don't spend a great deal of time thinking about the driver, because the driver is the single biggest determinant of relative fuel efficiency of any particular car. And I know from several tests that I've done on national TV for 7 News and Sunrise and other 7 News and Current Affairs programs, that if you drive gently, you will save up to 40, maybe 50%, depending on whether or not your default proposition is driving aggressively. This is particularly true in traffic. So if you'd want to save more than that $4.20 a week, a lot more than that, I'd suggest, all you need to do is remember that your right foot is connected to a tap when you drive your car. And the tap empties your tank, we get that, but it also empties your wallet. And you can save 40%, say, on the cost of fuel with that 3.3 V6 just by driving gently. And that will have huge economic benefits to you. It's also good if we all did that. It'd be fantastic for Australia's energy security, and it wouldn't be too bad for the environment either, both in terms of CO2 emissions and also the kinds of noxious emissions that result directly in the premature deaths of plenty of people, thousands every year in Australia, in our big cities. So driving gently, that's got to be a lot bigger deal in terms of the benefit to you than just obsessing about those specs. Anyway, maybe this has made you think about the acquisition of your next new car and its fuel consumption a little differently. If that's the case, then my work here is done. I hope this helps. Thanks for watching. I'm John Cadogan.